G'day and welcome to the Campfire Project. Today I'm here first of all with Derek Rogers, who is a Wellbeing and Performance Consultant, trainer and coach. How are you, Derek?
Thanks, Alan. Thanks for inviting us, and lovely to be here with Richard and Neville today.
Thank you. And we've got Neville Starick, who is a counselling therapist and at Cynosure Counselling and Coaching. How are you, Neville?
I'm well, thank you. It's very cool down here on the border of Victoria, New South Wales, and we've got floods predicted, but it will be fine.
Hopefully it's going to improve. We've had too much water in the around Australia. And then we have Richard Paterson, who is a founder of the men's health charity, Basics for Blokes, where he helps men to take ownership of their own health. Welcome to the Campfire Project, Richard.
Great to be here, and thanks for the opportunity.
You're welcome. Now, we were talking about the subject of are we becoming more transactional and less interactive? And if so, what are the implications? And Richard, I'd love to throw this over to you to kick us off onto this, because this was a comment that you came up with and you thought, yep, are we getting more transactional? So what's your views on this?
It bothers me, is the short answer. I believe that as a species, we were designed to work in communities and in integrated groups with each other. My concern, and I'm not a scientist, I'm not a professional, this is purely anecdotal, but I'm just noticing that a lot of our activities are moving from being interactive to being transactional. And I guess the classic examples of that would be where we used to go to the bank and interact with a person to withdraw money. Now we do a transaction with a machine. The supermarket, we used to have a chat to the customer service person that would be either originally punching in our groceries and then scanning them. Now we do that ourselves. Even I think one of the great anomalies of our current world is that we still call the place where we get petrol a service station. I just think that's really weird because ain't no service. That's another example. And, this came to me. Originally, I was going on an interstate flight. And as I was going through the security, getting my hand luggage scanned, I just had this epiphany that in the whole process, that was the first piece of human interaction that I'd had. I booked my ticket online. I had checked in through one of the automatic kiosks at the airport, which gave me the baggage ticket, which was scanned automatically when I put it on the conveyor belt. And then and even when I went into the car park, and it just spat out a ticket to hang on to for me to cash in, to pay for on my exit. And then it was funny because while I was in the queue, I'll talk to anybody, and I do. And like I went to talk to the person in front of me, and he's busily doing an email on his phone. And so then I turned behind me, and there was a mum with kids, and the kids have got their iPads, and mum's watching something on YouTube on her phone. And I just thought, this bothers me. I think we're made to be living in community, and we're supposed to be interactive with each other and to a degree interdependent, I think, on each other. And to me, that's where we're at our healthiest. And so this kind of created a bit of a rabbit burrow for me. And I've kind of, once I had this insight, I kind of can't put it down. And I'm just about to hand over the manuscript of a book that I've written about this to my editor. So that's my background, or where this whole thing came about and my view on it.
I'm glad you actually explained what the difference was between transactional and interactive, because I was looking at those two words and going, a transaction is a form of interaction anyway, and I wasn't quite sure where that was all gonna play out. So if I'm hearing you right, what you're actually talking about, Richard, is the whole sense of we've moved away from the human side of connection And it's just purely about the whatever it is that we're consuming or whatever it is that we are transacting. That has become the focus. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. So it's actually the transaction that's become the focus.
Yep.
Not the interaction.
Yep, and the whole change of the move out of customer service. The customer service has now become very depersonalized, very much machine-driven. And while there's efficiency with that, what we're losing is the opportunity to interact with each other.
Yeah, and that brings up another thing, and it's the teacher in me can't rest, so I get a bit wordsmithy. But we've also become really obsessed with efficiency. And potentially at the cost of effectiveness. Yeah.
Okay. Can you elaborate on that?
So like I think we've become focused on efficiency is all about the economics. So you do a calculation and the bank says, well, it's cheaper for us to invest this much money and put a whole lot of machines with money in them in the wall. That's cheaper for us than paying salaries for people in a branch. So the whole judgment is made on economic efficiency. But I think it's a very much a micro view, because holistically with the economy, if people are not working, it's actually not economically efficient to stop paying wages. It might be for the bank, but as a community, it's actually not for the whole economy holistically.
That's it.
Who does those numbers?
That's the biggest issue. When you look at all this stuff, that we look at it in isolation, like the transaction, we look at it and we go, okay, how do we make that efficient and get things done quickly, all the KPIs and everything else, but we don't see the flow-on effect to other areas. Because we haven't got people working. Who's paying their wages? Who's looking after them? And then we've got the health issues that we've got the increase in our taxes and everything else because people are sick. We've got all those follow-ons that we don't even look at. And Derek, you work a lot with men and their health and everything else. So what are you finding here? What's the impact of this transactions on them?
It's definitely reducing people's inability to connect properly and social anxiety. I was just talking to someone last night and they just said they're in Melbourne and they had floods with COVID, just being stuck at home, losing that confidence, and then social anxiety just increases. But I can totally relate to you, Richard. When I moved from country South Australia back to Melbourne 22 years ago, I jumped on a tram and I was looking for the tram conductor. And there wasn't one. And I'm sitting there and I thought, okay, well, someone come up. And they said, oh, no, you have to go up to their machine there and get your ticket. And I go, well, someone wants to. And then you have ticket inspectors. And I go, you've got all these ticket inspectors. They might as well just have somebody on the tram. And then I got to the station and then I go, oh, where's the guy to buy my ticket and tell me where to go? No, there's a machine and you have to read the machine. And I went, oh, my God, where's the humanness? And you're right. It's just been replaced with this efficiency, and it's almost like a scary futuristic movie where we're just in this world of machines. And of course, we've seen now with COVID the impact on people's mental health and well-being is just skyrocketing in a downward trend. And of course, economics, let's just keep carrying on. And it is a real conundrum, and it is a real concern because I'm sure you're seeing it, Richard, you're seeing it, Alan, you're seeing it, Neville, and I'm seeing the impact on people's health and well-being is they're struggling, and it's something that's for progress, great, but is it good for us as a society? No. And I'm grateful. I just came back from a men's well-being of 3 days with men sitting up in the hills, and it was like being with 30 Buddhist monks, and it was just beautiful, that deep personal connection. I went, oh my God, I just don't get this anywhere because of all these, impersonal system efficiencies. And we've got to be okay, it's not going to go away, but we need to, I suppose our challenge is to find how can I balance that? Because as human beings, this is in our DNA. We need this to function properly at that interactive and interpersonal level. So it's I got my dose on the weekend. I'm grateful, but yeah, unless you're aware of this, you're just going to go on this downward spiral.
And one of the other implications of this that I've only just recently sort of cottoned onto is that my belief is that as we become more reliant on self-service, we're actually becoming more self-serving. And as we become more self-serving, we demand more self-service. And we're getting this cycle that is, self-perpetuating. And the whole thing is it's all this move towards isolation and lack of social integration.
And it's interesting you're saying that, because I'm just thinking about things like your self-service at your supermarkets and the banks and all the online apps that sort of circumvent actually having to talk to a real person. And one of the things that really seems to stand out for me is the whole the value disconnect. There's this kind of like, we want efficiency and we're prepared to sacrifice our interactions to be able to do that. We want to be able to do things for ourselves, which sounds really good in theory, but as a result, we then therefore no longer have a lot of tolerance then for people who don't actually follow our agenda. We've lost our sense of patience, be able to wait for things to happen. It reinforces the whole sense of like, I need to do it and I need to do it now. And we just we don't tolerate when people don't meet our expectations, and our expectations are becoming wildly unrealistic for human interaction.
Yeah,
that impact is definitely coming back onto our health, both emotional and also physical.
And I'm thinking even some of our communication strategies. Look at the social media stuff. There are certain social media platforms, which I won't name, but there are certain social media platforms that you are severely risking putting any kind of communication out there, because there are people that you don't know that will sit there and respond very badly, and they will be totally fine with that, and then you might be completely shattered by the response that you got. And there's this whole sense of courtesy and etiquette, and how do we treat people is very much about, well, you're just an object out there. I disagree with you, so I'm going to slam you with all of the venom that I can possibly put into that, and leave that person completely scarred. And I don't see the consequences of that. So I can just go and put that comment out there, and I don't have any responsibility for what somebody else, how it affects somebody else. And I think that's really dangerous. It's like we've lost our sense of boundaries around our interactions because we don't do them. We do transaction.
Yeah. So all those things are compounding, and we know that, well, somebody who tries to bully other people, like those who put those comments out on social media, they're generally people who are feeling very low self-esteem. They feel, they've been bullied themselves, or they're just trying to get over the top of everybody else, so they start to feel better about themselves. It's like, all these, some of the programs are out there where both men and women are trying to be the man or the woman. Well, they're in permanent competition. They're always going to be fighting with each other, and and it's not a place to be. It's a lonely place. But when you have community, when you have people that you can sit down and talk to, as you said, Derek, being away in that men's group and that for the 3 days gave you that connection to all of them, and it slowed down the rate at which you were moving, because you were sitting, you were talking, and in those conversations we slow down. Whereas everything else, we're trying to get this picture always happening and things moving quickly, and we're pulling ourselves backwards in that fashion. So we need to take time. We need to be more interactive with people. But when we start to get interactive, do you find that people are more reactive or proactive?
Oh, definitely reactive. It's we're moving at such a pace, we don't have time to think about our responses. So it's kind of like, okay, something happens, I need to do a quick response, which is rarely ever thought through very well, and therefore I need to deal with this and move on. It was interesting. I had a situation recently where this kind of cropped up for me, and just talking about this now, it was just like there was a conflict that had turned up within a group of people. And when I sat down and reflected on my response in the conflict, it was like, I just want to get this fixed and get it over and done with so that I can get on with the rest of my life. And it was going to take time to go and sort out the conflict, but I chose the easy route to sit there and go, yeah, well, this is efficient. This will actually solve it. And it didn't. It made it worse. It was like, okay, we needed to make the time to actually work out what was going on so that we could then deal with the conflict. And I think the compounding effect of all of this, the speed that we're moving at and the drive for efficiency, is that we don't make time. We think that everything should be a quick fix, and we don't factor in how much is involved in getting to a solution that's actually going to work well for everybody involved, and taking the time to hear what's behind the conflict showing up.
Yeah, I see hope. I think with COVID that hit the world, it forced humanity to stop. We were going faster and faster, and you're only getting that tipping point where we know that the environment's hurting, and people and families are hurting, where people were travelling, commuting with work, and then all of a sudden forced to be at home. And so we had that great opportunity to stop and reflect. But of course, reflecting is only optional and highly recommended, if not compulsory. So those people who did that, realised that slowing down is actually good for them. And like your background, Richard, being in nature, and I've just been promoting to people, when we can stay at home and order everything on our phone, and our whole world, and it'll just, you can live in your bedroom and everything can be just ordered at the door, and you never have to leave. So the downside of all this efficiency is the opposite, is getting back into nature, putting the phone down, getting out there, grounding yourself, breathing, and just that resets us. So I'm just been promoting people that do that. Get out there in nature, take a few deep breaths, and one extra one for good measure, and enjoy it. So I post slow stop Sundays. We've got fast Fridays, and I go, man, it's if you can't stop and slow down and connect with nature and your family on a Sunday, when the hell are you going to do it? So it's
and I think there's great benefit, whether you want to call it therapeutic benefit, whatever.
Absolutely, let's call it therapeutic.
There's, like we've got 5 senses, we should be using all of them. And, I think that, like one of my great passions is riding a motorbike. And I ride my bike with an open face helmet. And just the aromas and the smells and the fragrances that I pick up when I ride my bike that I don't get when I'm in the car. And it kind of fills me out. I feel like it fills me out as a human, because that's a sense that just doesn't get stimulated. When we're rushing backwards and forwards in the car, like, when I lived on the Gold Coast, I'd ride my bike down one of the streets in Broadbeach where all the restaurants were. And it was just beautiful. You smell the Greek restaurant. Then, there's the Thai restaurant. There's the Italian restaurant. And you just get this stimulation of the sense of smell.
You're making me hungry, Richard.
Yeah. but the same would apply. You go down a side street and you can smell what's blooming in people's gardens. You can smell the roses, and you can smell the jasmine, whatever's happening. And you think I can't explain it other than I feel more of a full person when all my 5 senses are getting stimulated.
That's it.
Yeah.
And I think what we're doing is we're narrowing the senses that we're stimulating and using. And I think it narrows us as beings.
Very much so.
What would you say are the senses that are being least utilized? You're saying smell. Are there other ones that are being neglected?
I reckon we're obsessed with vision, with sight.
Okay.
Yeah,
everything is about how things look.
Okay.
And I think one of the things, I think there's a decline in hearing. We don't listen to people. We hear what they say, but we don't listen to them. And we're so driven by vision. You know, everything's got to look right, and everything's got to look good. And we don't actually hear what is inside people, because we're not using our hearing. So it's kind of the reverse of, I'm answering the question in the reverse way, is saying that I think we're obsessed with sight.
And I think sometimes, despite the fact that we're kind of a little bit obsessed with speed, we don't move very much. We don't sit in our bodies very, very much and pay attention to just even the motion of walking, the motion of going out and enjoying the sunshine on your skin, all that kind of stuff. We kind of neglect that whole sense of movement and the sensations that we absorbed just from being in our environment. So we're tuning out so much and sitting here on our phone somewhere else other than where we actually are. And I think that's also really, you sort of sit there and go, how much time do we give to this? And I'm really challenged myself, because I'm realizing that the lure of the phone is really strong, and it's getting stronger. And to be able to put it down and to not engage with it is actually taking a lot more discipline than I expected. And trying to find ways to get outside, finding ways to do things that don't involve the phone, trying to find ways to interact with people that don't involve technology is becoming more difficult. And that's just because there are so many options to use technology for all of those things that feel like, oh, it's just easier. And it's like, and so it's sort of like, well, I could do a Zoom call, but no, maybe I'll just go and do a text message. But no, that just takes too long. And no, I don't want to do a call. That's just going to require me to think too much. So I won't do a phone call. And so it's just kind of like, we sort of, our modes of communication also seem to be shrinking.
And becoming transactional.
Like I'm calling you for a reason. I'm calling you for a reason, not because I just want to talk to you.
And also, you know, a text message is a much more transactional way of communicating than a phone call, which is interactive. And that seems to be the, you know, like if they decide, oh, I can't be bothered going to whatever, I'll just send a text and say I'm not coming. And it's just so easy to not.
As you said, it requires effort, and I've certainly seen this with our younger generation. It's all just, you know, it's even just little emoticons, sending backwards and forwards, little GIFs, anything that's simpler, quicker, faster. That you're right, that avoids that. I have to get the phone call and have a real discussion. And then, of course, the more we avoid it, then the more uncomfortable it becomes actually having it. And then you create this situation of avoidance. And so I was just horrified with my kids that was the way they were going, you know.
So I'm seeing a bit of a push and pull, or a you know, disconnection between the transaction and the interaction. It's like if you put you're doing a workshop and you put it up on social media and you say, right, this is running on this day. We did that recently, and we had over 2,200 people said they were coming along to it. We had 190 something people turned up. So it's less than 10%. If you get 5% of the people who said they're coming, then you're doing well. But the whole thing comes down to it is that they wanted the interaction, but when it came round to it, as you were saying, they just didn't bother. It's like, oh no, that's too much like hard work. We've lost that connection with each other. And I think all of our senses are important, but they've got to be used. I don't like the word balance, but they integrate with each other. They flow with each other. So I haven't looked at the stats to find out where the proof of this was, but in a conversation I had this morning, I was told that during COVID, because all the young children babies who were born, were not seeing anybody with a whole face. They were seeing the masks all the time. That the tests are showing that it's about 20% drop in IQ level of those kids born through COVID. If that's the case, it highlights the fact that we need interaction. because that's the impact it's had on a child who hasn't been conditioned by the world yet in the very early stages. It's, by the way, I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to have to go and check those stats and find out, because I like to verify everything I hear. But as they say, the old Arabic saying, trust everybody, but lock up your camels at night. So I'll listen to what everybody says and I'll go out and check it. And that helps me then to interact with a few more people in that process of checking on things as well. We're social beings. We need to be connected. If we don't connect with people, if we don't feel that we belong, that we don't feel that we contribute, that we're not valued, we feel unloved. And we're all, people are wired to be part of a community and feel that they're loved.
I think
in transactions, we've got problems.
And I think there's a, once again, please excuse me being a wordsmith and being a bit of a pain about this, but I think we're also misusing the term connected, you know, because I think what we need to be doing, we need to be integrated. There's a big difference between being connected and being integrated. So we, you know, like we're friends on Facebook, so we're connected. No, I've got no idea who that person is. But just because I'm friend, and we're kind of using that term loosely, that, you know, we're connected, but we're not. We're connected, but connected is not what we want. We want to be integrated.
Yeah, and it's interesting, the whole, we've got this language that kind of implies that we've got a stronger relationship than we actually do on a lot of our social media platforms. And the reality is that our connections are acquaintances at best for most of the people that we're connected with on social media. So I kind of object to the Facebook using the term friends, because I want you to be my friend. It's just kind of like, well, a friend kind of implies there's going to be a little bit of give and take and more interaction. But in most of the cases, it's like, well, I accept the friend request and then I never hear from them again. And it's like, well, what was that about? I don't feel like you're my friend. I feel like you're just an acquaintance. So it would be nice if they changed the term, because it would reduce the expectation.
Yeah, but of course they do that on purpose. They employ neuroscientists that understand our brains more than we do, and they create that false sense of belonging in community because that's good for their business, and they can sell more sponsorship, and they don't give a flying fruitcake about how people actually feel it. And it's all this false stuff. And apparently that the little like was designed, and that when you do that, it just triggers dopamine hitting your brain. So, you know, you're like moths going to a light. You're just automatic.
Which then does the vanity metrics. How many likes did I get? How many connections do I have? All that kind of stuff. It's like it's reinforcing this completely false picture of how I am connected to the world, and it sets people up for massive failure in relationship.
Oh yeah, and depression. The research shows with teenage girls, the longer they're on social media, the more their confidence decreases, their sense of self-worth decreases, and you know they head towards more anxiety and depression. So
that's why, as I say, it's between the girls between the age of 11 and 15, more than 5% will attempt suicide, and that's because of that disconnection. These are the things that we're up against when we keep trying to streamline everything and make it all more transactional and quicker and everything else. We're creating a lot of problems for ourselves, and we don't stop and go, okay, what's the ramification for that? Because you know, life is run on cause and effect. If this happens, then this will be the flow on from that. But we never look to see what the flow on is. We just look at that in that little silo. Yeah, if I can do it this way, I can get the transaction done faster.
And on top of that, there's this whole thing of like the sheer volume of information that's now accessible. I mean, in the past, when I was a kid, it was like there were magazines. It's like there were newspapers, and you had to buy one to actually be able to access the information that they provided. Now, click of a button, I can search. I can get information from a million different places, and then I have to sift through that and work out what's real and what's true and what's not. And often don't have the skills to do that. So I'm sitting there with half-formed ideas that I've got no way to verify, which then fuels a whole bunch of behaviors around like, this is what I think is supposed to be going on. And the streamlining has opened up opportunities for a whole bunch of things to be out in public. But the question was never asked, should it be in public? And what's the impact of having all of that available so readily?
And I think the 24-hour news cycle is just deadly with that, because you know, the media is a market, and they rely on but getting an audience, and getting people watching and listening. So where they have to, the pressure on the media to keep something new coming all the time. So even something that's insignificant has to be sensationalized to become attention seeking. And like, I remember, you know, like when I was at school, when I was a kid and at school, and probably even when I was at uni, you'd kind of want to get home for 6 o'clock to see what was on the news. And they'd have like, I don't know how many, 12 items on the news. So they had to sift through all the things that happened during the day and put the 12 most important things on in that half an hour episode of the news. Whereas now they're going 24 hours a day. They've got to sensationalize stuff that's just insignificant. And I think, as one of my mates put it really appropriately, he said, we've got too many journalists and not enough news. And so they've got to sensationalize stuff to kind of get above the pack.
And at the same time, like Derek was just mentioning, that there's this whole fear component. Like, fear is highly behind a lot of the sensationalization. I'm just reflecting on things like the 2011 floods in Brisbane. I just could not get over how that was handled, because it was like you got the same footage over and over and over again. Maybe a little bit of a different background narration behind it, but it was like you're just seeing the same images again and again and again and again. And I was having clients at that time who were glued to the TV. They were not personally affected by what was going on in the Brisbane floods, but they watched what was going on and it terrified them. And it was just like, and they're sitting there going, I'm feeling really bad about it. And sitting there, well, why are you watching the news? And it's like, I feel like I have to. And it's just like, no, you don't have to. This is not affecting your life right at this particular minute, and you're not planning to do anything to help the people who are affected by that. So why are you doing this? So it's almost like this addictive type of I've got to know, but knowing is actually causing problems.
The greatest tragic example of that was, I lived in Surfers Paradise for 10 years, and during schoolies, you know, you'd watch the news and everybody going, oh, how are you coping in Surfers with all the school? They were so well behaved. When you think there's tens of thousands of young people who just finished school and they got every reason under the sun to be misbehaving, they weren't. They were incredibly orderly. We lived in a resort. In fact, we lived in 2 different resorts over time where lots of schoolies stayed. And my son was probably about 7 when we had the first schoolies. And if we were in the swimming pool at our resort, and those schoolies, they would self-regulate their language. So if one of the kids swore, the others would tell them off and say, hey, don't say that, there's a kid in the pool. Like that. And they'd bump you in the street, they would apologise. I found the behaviour was extraordinarily outstanding of those young people, almost impeccable, and yet you'd watch the news and you'd see there might be 3 fights out of 60,000 kids. There'd be 3. That's what would get on the news. And most of them weren't even the kids. They were the toolies, the older ones that were causing trouble. But it used to get me so angry. Those kids were so well behaved. It was just ridiculous.
See, if the news can keep playing that, those little segments over and over again, then people start to see that as the norm. And then you've got those what feel that, okay, I've got to sort of stand out because I've got to be the man or the woman type thing. They then start behaving as per the little segments we've seen, thinking that's the norm. And we have a drop in our the quality of our behaviours and everything else.
Yeah.
The news has always been good for, well, as I say, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Yes.
I'll hear the words they'll use, and they'll go searching using words to try and get the reactions they're listening to. I watched a documentary the other day, which is on criminal investigation, and I was appalled at the presenter who kept on asking questions. If they asked questions like that in a research situation, they'd be thrown out the door.
Yeah.
In a survey, a referendum, etc., you have to word things in a certain way. But they put so much emotion in it, stirring it and asking questions that would set the situation up that people then answer in a certain way.
Yep.
All of us saw a car crash, for instance, and I said to one of you, and I said to all of you 2 different times, I said, well, how fast was that car going when it hit the other car? I'd get a certain speed. If I asked a group of people the same question and I use the words, how fast was that car going when it smashed into the other vehicle, the level of speed will be actually a percentage higher again. Depends on the language we're using. So all of that is causing us to give away our control of our lives. Everything more transactional. Everyone's rushing, and the more you're rushing, the easier it is to push somebody off angle. If somebody's standing beside you and you lean against them, doesn't move. But if they're moving quickly, you just give them a little bump, boom, they veer off. Our speed is one of the biggest problems I see at the moment.
And I think along with that is the focus. The focus is so much on the things that nobody wants. So it's like we focus on the fights, we focus on this, we focus on that, and it's very much a negative skewed view of human behavior. It's like we don't get a lot that emphasizes the positive behaviors that we want to reinforce. And so it almost seems like it's sending this message that this is what it is to be human. This is how we can expect to behave. This is what we can expect from other people, which then works against the interaction even more. So it's like, okay, I'm expecting that somebody's going to be aggressive and is going to attempt to pick a fight with me, so I will not engage. I will reduce my ability to connect with people to keep myself safe, because this is what I'm hearing all around me, is that it's very unsafe out there and people are out to get you. And and we don't get a lot of the other side, which is what you were sharing there, Richard, with the story of the schoolies. Is like, hey, out of all of the schoolies that are in there, the percentage of people who are causing trouble was very, very small. And yet it's being portrayed as if this is the dominant thing that's happening in this particular context. And we have no way to verify that. So it's like we're sitting there watching the news and thinking, well, okay.
And I think that the social media algorithms feed our worldview, which widens the chasm between, like, and I think, I know it's a controversial issue, but if we took COVID vaccinations as a classic example, that the social media algorithm follows what you're reading. So if you're an anti-vaxxer, you start reading all the anti-vaxxing stuff. So when you put something into your search engine, it will feed you the anti-stuff because that's what you've been looking at. Similarly, on the other side, if you're a pro-vaxxer, it's going to feed you all the pro-vaccine stuff. So what it's actually doing is creating bigger chasms between us and separating who we are and restricting those, almost making us live in silos. So we hang around and we live in like cyber silos with people that have the same worldview as us. And we're supposed to be talking about non-discrimination, but we're actually creating cyber ghettos, so we're all congregating with people of like mind, which actually is reducing our tolerance.
Once upon a time, fear used to be a gift. It would keep us alive and everything else, but now people are so fearful of everything that it's now become a detriment. because we end up worrying about things that will never happen, and the things that we should have taken notice of that our fear has not picked up are the ones that end us up in a lot of trouble.
Absolutely. And I think in summarising what we've just been talking about, it's that the media and politicians are just equally the same. It's based on that fear, because fear has its hardwired for fear to pay attention. So we've got to ignore that and get out with our communities and just sort of be the person on the street and connect. And as you said, Rich, you just see what's really happening is the way to go, because, it's I say to people, I'm sure you guys too, is just don't watch the news. It's designed to do your head in. It's designed to make you fearful. Is that how you want to be? And of course the answer is no. But if you don't have that self-awareness, you'll be just sitting there watching it all day, because it's 24/7, and you'll have you that afraid that you won't want to leave the house.
And I absolutely believe that it's core in all of us that we actually want to be integrated. Fundamentally, it's in our DNA that we want to be. And I'll just very quickly try and condense what happened. But I was, during the lockdowns here in Melbourne, I was out mowing the lawns one day, and it really disturbs me, the sort of separation and the alienation that these lockdowns cause. And I'm out mowing the lawns feeling really cross about it all, thinking, I want to be a world changer. How can I change all of this and all that sort of stuff? And I just had this sense of use what's in your hands. And I'm going, but it's a mower. And anyway, I just had this concept. So I went and I decided to mow the nature strips. I'm in a court with 20 houses. So I decided to mow the nature strips of the whole street while I'm out there with my lawnmower. And while I'm doing that, I noticed a couple of houses that I'm new in the area, so I didn't really know them. But there was one house in particular that, had been fairly well kept, and it had just really declined. So I went and knocked on the door and I said, look, I've got the mower out. Is it okay if I mow the front lawn? And the lady said, oh, yeah, that'd be fantastic. That'd be great. Thank you. So I did that, and then I ended up mowing about 3 or 4 front lawns in the street, plus all the nature strips. And so I made this a bit of a habit, and I kind of got out and did all. Well, we've got a WhatsApp group in the street from the Christmas party the year before. And after I started doing this, one of the ladies puts a message on WhatsApp saying, I've just picked a basket full of lemons. I'll put them out by the letterbox because we're all in lockdown. She said, come and help yourself if you want some lemons. And then somebody else said, oh, I've just picked a box of limes. I'll put them out by the letterbox. And somebody else had some persimmons, and somebody else had curry leaves. And we started doing this free market trading in the street. And somebody posted on there, they said, thanks, Richard, for initiating a sense of community in the street. And I thought, that's just amazing. And just to finish that off, kind of unrelated, but it was amazing what happens when you just do something. That particular house that was a bit dishevelled and neglecting their yard, about the 4th time that I mowed the lawn, this middle-aged guy comes out who I'd never seen before, and he said, oh, thanks for mowing the lawn. Mum's really appreciated that. And so looking at him, I'm thinking his mum must be, in her 70s roughly. And I said, oh, how is your mum? And he burst into tears, and she said she died last week. And it turns out that she was getting palliative care in the house, which is why the garden was being neglected. And I just thought, I would have been completely oblivious to the fact that there's a lady dying 2 doors down from where I live because there's no relationship, there's no interaction within the street. And yet through doing some sort of act of service, it heightened that. And this guy so I switched the mower off and I sat on the front steps with him of his mum's house, and he just bawled his eyes out. And he had no one to talk to about the grief that he was experiencing with his mum's death. And I kind of went away from there, and I thought, you know what? I'm really glad I acted on my instinct there and started mowing some lawns. And as simple as that seems, our street is now a community. It's not a bunch of houses with people living in them. It's a community, and all sorts of stuff's going on in our street now. And it all started just because I started mowing the nature strips and doing something to create community.
And it's interesting. It's like your action on one level could have been transactional, and it turned into something else. It's like it could have been, you could have been asking for payment for that, and that would have been where it ended. But you did that. You offered this, and it generated something in everybody else in that street. They noticed, they appreciated it, and they then almost did a pay it forward type of thing. It's like, okay, I experienced this, what can I give? And what flowed out of that then was a series of interconnections and crossing divides and sharing. And it's a wonderful story. Thanks for sharing that.
Sadly, it's a new concept in the cities. Research shows that never in the history of mankind has been more people squashed together, but at the same conundrum, they're also feeling alone because they don't know their neighbours. And people living in apartments and up and down lifts and things, and not having those conversations. Where in the country, I've lived in country towns probably a third of my life. It's normal to grab your neighbour's milk and bread and mow their lawn and pick up stuff for them and pick up their kids, and because you have that natural sense of community, you're seeing the same people and you're feeling safe. And I suppose in the city, because they're heading off this direction of work, and that you don't have that community unless you make the effort. So I've always grown my own fruit and veggies, and I've turned my front lawn into a veggie garden and shared it with people. And for a start, they're horrified, and and then I kept growing it. And they would go to the supermarket, and I think, you don't have to go to the supermarket. Here's this. Like a totally new concept. So it's it can be contagious, and you just have to break down those barriers of fear that people have been conditioned in. And we need more people to love our neighbours. So awesome. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, this gives you a lot to think about. And that was like, there was a bit of a pause there, and that's what I like about, because all of us stopped to think, about the story, the impact, and everything else. And I don't think that we're doing that enough. And as you said before, we're focusing too much on the wrong stuff, the stuff that we can't change, that just pulls our fears and everything else. It's like I looked at it originally when 9/11 hit, and I thought, rightio, who are the biggest terrorists? The terrorists that flew 3 planes into 2 buildings, or the journalists who flew those planes into those buildings thousands of times. And we kept seeing it all the time, building more and more fear and everything else, and people pulling back. There's a number of people who didn't want to go into those areas again because of that connection. We found the same thing with COVID. We came out of lockdown, and people didn't just rush out back out those streets. They were still reluctant. In fact, when Scott was up from Melbourne and Angela was down from Queensland, we were here in Newcastle. We went to the beach. We were first couple that Scott went up to give a pair of socks to. The older guy, a husband and wife, he took off and he started to run because Scott walked up. Big smiley T-shirt and a pair of socks and everything else, not really that threatening.
No.
The thing was, I realised the threat was interaction, the fear of it. And when he started speaking to the wife, she said, that was our biggest fear, that people weren't wearing masks because everybody had to have that protection over their face. And I said, but you're wearing a mask, so you're protected. But, what is it that you need to see everybody else? What you're doing now is you're not seeing their smiles. You're not seeing their interactions with you. Yes, the smiles are really in the eyes. You just got to look at that to know whether the person's smiling or not. But most people weren't looking enough to see that. There's so much there that we need to do.
I think going back to the, it's a conundrum that this whole thing about being scared with things that we see on the television. But then also, I don't think we actually really digest how human these issues are. Like I was leading a camp a couple of weeks ago down at Phillip Island, and there was another camp happening at the campsite at the same time, and there was this small group of 10-year-old kids came and sat just outside where we were staying, and I went and chatted to them, and long story short, I started chatting to these kids, and on the Tuesday night at the campsite, somebody set off the emergency warning system, and this siren had gone, and everybody had to congregate on the oval and all that sort of stuff and do a head check and a head count and everything. And anyway, I'm talking to these kids, and one of the kids said something with an accent. I said, "Oh, it's a beautiful accent. Where are you from?" And she said, "Oh, I'm from the Ukraine." And this turns out that this little group of kids, 10-year-old kids, they're all Ukrainian refugees. And I started chatting to them, and I said, "It must be nice for you to be in Australia. Like, this must be a bit of a relief for you to be." And they said, "Oh, we love Australia." And they've been here 3 months. And I said to this little girl, "What's the best part of being in Australia?" And even now, it really stirred me. And she said, "I love it in Australia because I feel safe." And I didn't know, but these kids, one of them was in a catatonic state on the Tuesday night when that siren went off with the emergency warning system there. And they were contemplating having to ring paramedics because this kid was like paralyzed. And the fear that was in them. And I started reflecting on that, and I thought, I watch all the footage of the war in the Ukraine. I think, isn't that horrible? What an atrocity. But it moves me to a different depth now because it's real. I met little kids that were in that. And all of a sudden, that's friggin' real, that war. That's not just, and I think whilst we get upset and, moved by that sort of stuff, I think we really struggled. Is that a movie or is that actual people's lives?
Yeah.
There's a very, very fine line between what we see on television when we're watching a movie on Friday night and we're watching the news on Thursday evening. Do we differentiate? Or do we just say, "Oh, God, that's horrible. That was awful." Or do we actually, right in our the core of our inner being, get moved by every person that's killed in the Ukraine is somebody's son or daughter? And it's even the same when we see something about a horrible car accident here. 3 people killed. Isn't that horrible? But if one of those is your kid, it's not just a number.
That's it. It's
a person. And I think my concern with all this, blowing on the flame of fear is it's actually depleting our humanity.
That's it.
It's totally desensitizing us. So it's just in our face every day, and we just go, "Oh, that's awful," and just brush it off. But you're right, until it's right there beside you, it's hard for us to actually comprehend, and then it becomes real for sure.
Show us the news once so that we can sit with it and we can digest it, we can then integrate with it, etc. And don't just give it to us where it hits us so fast that we just turn our senses off towards it. Desensitize ourselves to the situations. The more that we actually are close to something when it happens, then the more that we then take responsibility around that, the more we're involved in it, and it does change our way of thinking. And I think if more people worldwide were thinking in that particular way, there'll be less of these people making the decisions they're making that are causing these atrocities in the first place.
Yeah.
So it's being integrated, being connected, but not connected, as of telephone connected to that device type thing, but connected to our emotions.
Transactional connection, really, isn't it?
That's it. Because the phone is just a transactional thing. It's getting me some information, it's, passing something on or whatever, but it's not engaging me.
No.
And
that's the beauty that I felt being away for 3 days with no phone connection with the guys and with the nature, that we are all connected, that everything is connected. We're connected to the earth, we're connected to the sky, we're connected to the trees, the flowers, and just in our normal world where we're just sitting in our offices or sitting in our homes, it's very easy to be disconnected because it's not a natural world. So, yeah, I just keep banging on, get out there and in the natural world and breathe deeply, put your shoes and socks off, ground yourself, get out of your head, and you'll feel a hell of a lot better for it.
Yeah, well, we're connected to everything all the time, but are we engaged with it? And as you said, you slow down, you spend time, you actually engage with it. So as we're getting towards the end of this, Neville and Richard, have you got something else you'd like to share with people before we wrap it up?
Just the comment there about the safety stuff. I had an experience where I visited an African country probably about 12 years ago, and living in compounds where they had barbed wire over the top. It was not perceived to be safe to be wandering around on your own, all that kind of stuff. When I came back to Australia, I was totally had this reverse culture shock type of thing where it's just like, we don't know how safe our place is. It's like, I'm sitting there going, the house I was living in at the time had fly screen on the window that you could pull off if you really wanted to. The front door, if somebody wanted to kick it open, they could. The fence was not really a barrier for anybody getting into the backyard. And here I was hearing people talking about, oh, I feel so unsafe. And it's just like, you haven't been where I've been.
Yeah.
And so there is a bit of a relativity around that, but I think there's also a sense of needing to challenge ourselves on making things safe, not sitting there waiting for somebody else to do that too. And I think that will then, the network that we develop with our interactions and our engagement with other people will actually combat that whole feeling of I'm not safe.
And one of the things that struck me about those Ukrainian kids was that it's one thing to be safe, but it's far more important to feel safe.
Yeah, spot on.
The reality of feeling safe is what I thought was, I'm yet to really explore that. But there's just something inside of me that sparked a curiosity about. We think that being safe is important, and I think particularly for our kids, it's really important that they have a sense of feeling safe, not just being safe.
And I think we've got a much better a chance of achieving that if we actually interact with people instead of transacting with them. Get rid of the transactions and move more towards the integration and connection.
Yeah,
that will change things.
Most people are not scary.
Exactly right.
Exactly right. Okay, gentlemen, well, thanks very much for being here today and sharing in the conversation. As always, I always get a lot out of it. Now, I'm a greedy person. That's why I do these. So I enjoy everyone's company because, I'm into the connections and that. That's why we have and the interactive connections, not just connecting, but interactive connections. And that's what we have every time we have these conversations. So again, gentlemen, thank you very much for being here today.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Richard and Neville. And if you were there, I'll give you all a big hug. So thank you.
Likewise. Thanks so much. It's been very stimulating. Much appreciated.
Yeah, very good.
And to everybody else, I hope you got a lot out of today's discussion, and we'll see you on the next campfire. Bye for now.
Thanks, Alan.
Thanks.
Bye.